Mr. Smith here with this week's assignment, Introduction to the Renaissance. So this week we are diving into the sort of historical content for the quarter. First 2 weeks we looked at globalization as a general concept, and this week we're going to start diving into that historical content about the beginning of globalization in the world. And that starts with the Renaissance. And the Renaissance was both a time period, it was the late 1300s to the mid 1600s in Europe, and it was also a movement. And the Renaissance is really what finishes the Middle Ages. It's the official end of the medieval period in the world in general, and specifically in Europe. And what the Renaissance movement was specifically, it started in the small city-states and tiny kingdoms that existed in Italy in the late 1300s, and eventually spread across all of Europe. And it was this idea of a revival, of a coming back to, of a starting again with classical learning and ideas. And to Europeans at the time, what classical was referring to was ancient Rome and ancient Greek. And if you remember back in 6th grade when you learned about those, both ancient Rome and ancient Greece focused a lot on science and on culture and arts and education. And all of that had sort of been lost with the end of the Roman Empire, that fall of Rome that we talked about back at the beginning of third quarter. And that was sort of lost throughout the Middle Ages, the medieval period. If you remember, it was really dominated by the church that wasn't that interested in science. It wasn't interested in education for anybody except for the clergy. It definitely wasn't interested in art or culture unless it was specifically focused on the church and on God. So the Renaissance was sort of a return to focusing on those things for Europe. And it started in Italy in particular. And what it meant was that it led to more interest and more focus and more attention and more time spent on art, on making art and consuming art and more forms of art and culture, on books and education. So education spreading more widely. It's still mostly going to be clergy and the upper classes, but at least it's not just the clergy anymore that are able to read and write. And then also on science and exploration. And we'll talk about that exploration component a lot more in the coming weeks. But this really became the driving force for modernity on sort of creating modern societies like we have today in Europe. And eventually is sort of spread around the globe by that European exploration that we're going to talk about in the future. So this is really the beginning of modern globalization, is with the Renaissance in Europe. So that's what you're going to be doing this week, is examining the Renaissance. And to do that, you're going to be filling out a Renaissance digital journal. It is linked at the bottom of this assignment. If you open that up, it'll give you a Google Slides document. After the title slide, the first slide there is vocab. And for that vocab, you can either use the textbook pages that are linked at the top of that page. They're linked into where it says unit vocab page. Or you can just use internet research to answer what each of those vocabulary words mean. You're putting the definitions in your own words, so paraphrasing the definitions on that table. And then the next 4 slides are each focused on a particular topic. The first one's a general about the European Renaissance, and then after that it's focused on specific parts of the Renaissance. And for each one you'll have a little bit of reading. You'll also have a couple of links to outside sources and videos on some of them, and questions at the bottom. So read the questions and answer them. You do need to use complete sentences in your answers. If you have trouble getting into any of the videos, so there's videos attached to both the humanism slide and to the printing press slide. Those videos are also embedded in the Google Slides document there. So if you can't open the YouTube links, just watch them on the Google slide at the end of that document. And then a final thing to cover here is that if you have trouble reading it, if you have trouble seeing it because it is very small on the page, just don't forget you can zoom in on the Google slide there and you can read the questions and the information a lot more clearly that way. As always, if you've got questions, if you're having trouble, if you want to just check in, you can drop by the Zoom office hours, or you can shoot me an email anytime and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. All right, good luck.